Come one and come all. Welcome to No Infringement Intended, an intellectual property podcast of our law firm, Troutman Pepper Locke, LLP, hosted by the so-called bad boys of intellectual property, Rusty Close and me, Austin Padgett. Fair warning, listeners, we have another guitar-related episode today, but we're coming at it from a little bit of a different angle. That should build up some expectation for you. And while we're getting ready for what we're about to drop on you, please make sure that you're subscribed. And you know what? Light up those 5 stars for your boys over here while you're at it. We've started to stack up some 5-star reviews, and it's really going to help us hit our ultimate goal, which is getting nominated for the Golden Globe Podcast Award. Rusty, I don't know if you saw that award exists now, but I just saw that on the latest Golden Globes.
Yeah, Amy Poehler's got something coming for her, and it's called the Bad Boys of IP.
Yeah, my kids, when we were watching it as a family, my kids were like, whoa, like, are you in the running for this? I said, it would just be an honor to be nominated. So
I love that our kids think there's a chance, though. That's a beautiful thing.
I mean, yeah, this podcast is a big deal. Well, we keep it rolling. Rusty, I think you've got the old mailbag segment for today.
Yeah, speaking of being a big deal, loyal listener Chris in San Diego, fellow bad boy of IP,
nice,
reached out to let us know, what a great job we were doing, how much he was enjoying all of our episodes. But he had a question he posed for us. He wanted us to weigh in on who the greatest Georgia musical acts were. And I don't know that we can come up with a definitive answer. And we probably have to set some parameters and just say who are associated with Georgia. But I mean, where would you start?
The greatest. Man, I know some of my favorites.
Hey, that can be the greatest too.
Yeah. So we can knock out a few of the obvious. I mean, just go over to Athens.
Right.
And you've got several that you could list over there.
You got REM, you got the B-52s, you got, I'm sure a favorite of yours, Widespread Panic.
Absolutely. You have the entirety of the Elephant Six collective bands and the entire, wellspring that was and formed. You have the Future Birds.
Well, it's either Future Birds or the Future Birds. I think it depends on where you look. Similarly, Drive-By Truckers or the Drive-By Truckers, depending on the place and time. And, we can also go south to Macon.
Yeah, we could. We could go deeper south to Thomasville if we want to have let's stick with this. So let's just list some of, maybe instead of greatest, some of our favorites.
I think so. Our favorites. I mean, for me, obviously the Allman Brothers. You got Otis Redding. You've got the Black Crowes. And this isn't even getting into, the hip hop artists. So we've got Outkast and Goody Mob and Ludacris and all of those. But for me, if I had to just pick 2, it's going to be the Allman Brothers and the Black Crowes.
Man, yeah, that's a great list. I'm going to throw out a guilty pleasure of mine with Collective Soul from
there you go.
90s into the 2000s. They could write a hook like crazy. It's also in Varsity Blues with the song Run, which, as you know, is a huge impetus of this entire podcast.
Near and dear to both of our hearts.
Yeah. Down in South Georgia, I like the Curries. Do you know those guys?
I'm not familiar.
Man, just kind of more inventive folk.
Okay.
Some tight harmonies. It's good stuff.
That's a subgenre right there.
I think you'd enjoy it, actually. I'll send you some YouTube clips. If we're going to go kind of historically, Tommy Dorsey or Thomas Dorsey, known as Georgia Tom.
Okay.
I think he grew up in Georgia. He's most associated with Chicago, but he's kind of like the father of gospel music.
Got it.
And then historically, you've got Bessie Jones and the Sea Island Singers who kind of recorded and kept track of all the spirituals and things like that. So you've got across the state, you've got a wide spectrum of, you have jazz musicians, bluesmen, indie pop,
college rock.
You got Deer Hunter.
Right. Yeah.
Bro Country.
A favorite of both of ours.
Just for Chris's sake, I'm going to throw out a little, not huge deep cut, but Faye Webster out of Atlanta.
Okay.
She has kind of like this R&B thing that she does. But it's got steel guitar. It's a cool vibe. If you just need some good chill music, great lyrics, really interesting music. I think she's awesome. So,
well, we'll get some follow up from Chris and see if we met his expectations.
I love it. Thank you, mutual friend of the pod, Chris. Thank you for that. Well, Rusty, while we're naming things again, which is something that we apparently like to do on this podcast quite a bit, How about you name your names? Do you have any nicknames back in the good old days or have friends with great names?
I mean, Rusty is a nickname, right? So my given name is Christopher Coleman, and I'm a junior and had red hair when I was a kid. So Rusty, the name I've gone by all of my life, is a nickname. But two guys that I grew up with, one, his name was Jeremy, but his dad always called him Bullfrog, as in Jeremiah was a bullfrog.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And another buddy who, I mean, I've known since we were old enough to know other people. We went to preschool together. His last name was Rice, and a Little League baseball coach called him Rice Patty. And so all our lives, he was known as Patty. Everybody called him Patty. And we've been out of touch probably since college. So I don't know if he still goes by Patty, but he'll always be Patty to me.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I came through high school when Austin Powers was kind of becoming a big thing. So I got a lot of the Austin Powers and his various, catchphrases were
a lot of yeah babies thrown your way.
Yeah, groovy.
That had to be great.
Yeah, it was very interesting at least. But on our cross country team, one of our best runners was this guy named Jonathan Forrest. Shout out, Jonathan. So we would be out in the community on our, like one of our practice runs or something, and the buses would be running, and you'd hear these kids yelling, "Run, Forrest, run," as we're going. And I would tell you that was the worst thing that they yelled, but it wasn't even close. That was probably the most complimentary.
No respect for the cross country team.
Yeah, not at all. We also had, she was a lovely person and had a great name, Cheryl Merrill, in my high school class.
No way.
Yeah, I thought that was always a great name. So shout out to Cheryl as well.
For sure.
I should tell you, I didn't plan on, just in pure candor, when I ran cross country and I showed up for like our first practice, the student, Luke, looked at me and I was scrawny. I mean, barely anything. And he said, "Oh man, here comes Buff Man." But it was like Duff Man from The Simpsons. Right. He would say it like that. And that became one of the nicknames that I went by through high school. And at one point, there was this radio station that we would listen to on our drive to school, and they would give birthdays. And on my birthday, my mother and brother had called in, and I guess they sent an email or something because they didn't know how to say it. And so they said it Buffman, on my birthday as we were driving in. So great memories.
I'm going to see if I can get that one brought back and have it be your name at the firm going forward.
Buffman. Yeah. But yeah, the radio version would be an even better edit. So
right.
Well, the reason we're talking about names here is kind of this whole, what is a name? What's in a name type of thing. I wanted to talk about a weird trademark rule about surnames. There's a special trademark rule when it comes to protecting your surname as a mark. And so, Rusty, a few episodes ago, we learned that Stacy's true mission in life is to repair VCRs. It's a mission she's apparently run away from, but I hope that she's been reflecting on that episode. I know she listens, and so shout out to Stacy as well, because there's still time for, find this true purpose in life. As all my VCR repairman buddies tell me all the time, it's never too late.
Right.
Well, let's imagine Stacy finally sees the light and opens up her shop, and she names it Close VCR Repairs. She does this because VCR repair is an art, of course. Reputation, name, they mean everything in that line of business. Well, you and Stacy give me a call to get my professional expertise and tell me that we should help her get that business name protected. And I'm going to tell you that we have to have a hard conversation with Stacy right up front, right out of the gate.
And is this about the name or about the business plan in and of
I think
itself?
The business plan is sound.
Okay,
Rusty.
got it.
I think this, as I told you before, the time is now. There aren't that many VCRs, and therefore the market's wide open for her to jump in because the repairmen have all gone on to other skills and trades.
AI has taken their jobs.
That's right. Well, we're going to have this conversation, and I'm going to have to tell her in a pretty candid way that the Lanham Act does not like her name. And the Lanham Act is the federal trademark act that we have here in the U.S. And when I say that's a little bit of an overstatement, but the idea is that the Lanham Act has a special provision in it that prohibits the registration of marks that are, quote, primarily merely surnames, unquote. That's a weird mouthful, of course, primarily merely a surname, and hoping I don't have to say it too many times on this podcast. I knew what I was getting into when I signed up for this one. So any guesses, Rusty, as to the reasons that we're building this fence around surnames?
Well, I mean, in some ways, we don't want one person to sort of corner the market on a name when it's a name that others can have, I assume. I mean, we don't want to tie up that name when others might be out there wanting to use it in a similar way. And they're going, well, wait, what about me? Is this just because I didn't get there first? I don't get to use my own name. Is it along those lines?
It is. You've highlighted kind of both aspects of it in that we have like the tension between commercial interests and individual rights happening here. And so the main consideration is you want fairness to others because they might have that name. Everyone has a right to use their own name is kind of the old saying that you'll see in some of the older cases and case books. It's unfair to let anyone monopolize it. At the same time, it's kind of this lack of distinctiveness that it's primarily identifying people and not the products themselves. And so the reasoning is important because we'll get into some cases in a second, but you're going to get, when we go through the factors, you're going to get a taste of kind of both of those reasonings. That there's, I said this before on this podcast, that when it comes to trademarks, the key thing I keep reminding clients and colleagues about when we work through these problems is that this is all about consumer protection.
Right.
And that you have to kind of put that lens on first, that, there are some extra protections for your brand and what you've done and try to build it up and all those sorts of things. But really, it's about how are we protecting consumers from being confused as we go through these types of things. So it's not every surname. It's those marks that are primarily merely surnames. And so we get one of the classic go-tos in the law. We get a multi-factor test.
Love it.
So let me give you the 5 factors of what makes a primarily merely surname. First is, how rare is the surname? And this goes to that policy of, other people should be able to use their names. Well, if it's a rare surname, we don't have many people to worry about.
Right.
So the more common the surname is, the more likely a refusal will be at the trademark office. It's the general gist. So the second factor is, what's the connection between the name and the mark owner? Is it the name of a founder, a principal, someone associated with the business, something like that? As you would guess, the more connected it is to the business, the more likely it is to be found a surname. The third one is, does the term mean something besides a surname? That is, in your case, close. I mean, it's we'll work through it in a second, but I'm just hinting at it here.
Sure.
Fourth is, does it have the structure and sound of a surname? That is, does it have the look and feel of a surname? Does it have an apostrophe S at the end to make it look and sound? Or does it S-O-N, son, like Anderson or Masterson or something like that? And then the fifth is, how is the mark presented to consumers, which I'll tell you is probably the least important factor from my experience on going through these. Okay. So let's go through Stacy's business. We'll run it as hypothetical here. So let's go through these factors. How rare is the surname? You have any sense?
I mean,
Rusty?
I've never done any surveys. I think I haven't known a lot of closes that we weren't related to. I think if you flip through the phone book, if you can find one, it's maybe, depending if we're talking Metro Atlanta, maybe it's a part of a page, maybe a column, but it's not one I run into that frequently. And whenever I do, most people say any relation to Glenn. That is the big joke that they use.
Yeah. That makes sense. I see it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do is, I don't get to do it anymore, but when I was an associate, I would get to research how big is this surname? How many people have this name? And because you're often battling the trademark office around data, because they're going to go in typically and they'll look at like a phone book and like a national phone book that's available online, and they'll pull out, there's 25,000 names. What I like to do is go to the census data, because with the census, and it lags. I mean, it's a deep lag right now. We're still working off of 2010, that census. We didn't get that information until 2016. So there's a long lag in what you get, but it's good data because it breaks it down, and they give you like an Excel spreadsheet of any names that came up above 100 occurrences.
Okay.
So like at the top, you got Smith, and then you just keep working down, and you can see what was found in the census. I mean, to the number. And so I just looked up your surname, and there were 9,474 hits.
Okay.
At a rate of, for every 100,000 people you meet in the U.S., 3.21 of them will be of your tribe.
That kind of tracks with my experience.
Yeah, and that's the 3,739th most prevalent name in the U.S. So I would tell you from kind of experience, it's certainly not a big surname, but it's not super rare either. You're kind of You're kind of in the middle there. You're hanging out with a strange lot of about 10,000 folks.
Just the middling folks.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So weighing that factor, it's probably about neutral. There used to be when I first started practicing, if I could pull that data and I could show how few people had that name, I felt pretty good about my win. I logged in some pretty good wins for my trademark owning clients on that. And then over time, I would tell you from the practice, surnames has become a much bigger thing, and they reject a lot more based on this.
Okay.
So what about the connection between the name and the mark owner? That's an obvious one here. She took your name when you got married, so she's stuck with that connotation there.
For better or worse, as they say.
Yeah. So does the
richer or poorer?
That's right. Does the term mean something besides a surname? And here's where you may want to get inventive, kind of, and roll in that last factor of how it's presented. You may want to like close the door, or, proximity type of meaning. I don't know how you could do that in a graphic or something like that, but maybe you could make it seem like it's something other than a surname.
So, a lot of times people ask if it's close or close, and I'll tell them it's the adjective, not the verb. And then I like to watch their face as they try to process what I've just told them.
Right.
As they try to noodle through, which one is which. I can't figure it out.
Oh, yeah. I think I might have said it wrong already then on this actual podcast. So my bad.
No, you haven't. You've been using it the right way.
Okay.
Maybe you can, squish the letters close together, right? Like close up the space in between the letters, and it's close, or you put it nearer to the VCR repair or something, visually you're doing something wonky with it.
Yeah, I'm just marking down to make sure the difference between the pronunciations is whether you voice the sibilant or not. So if you allow your vocal cords to keep pushing through the S to become more of a Z, that's American phonetic alphabet, etc. So, all right, structure and term. Does it look and feel like a surname? I think they're going to say that one's probably neutral too, because it is a surname, but it's also a word. We'll talk more about this neutrality thing in a little bit, because I've got some bones to pick here in bringing this one up. So how do you think this turns out? If you get the rejection, you've got to go argue with the trademark examiner.
Well, in my experience with patent examiners, and I think it's the same for trademark examiners, they've sort of got quite a bit of discretion. And it kind of just depends on what they want to do and how they're feeling on a given day. And as long as they can make a reasonable case, they can kind of go whichever way they want. I'm sort of naturally a pessimist, so I'm kind of thinking that it would get rejected. But I do think it's not the most common name, and I think there's some factors that are working in our favor.
Yeah, I think if we get inventive on the logo and present it as a logo rather than a word mark, we might stand a chance. But like you, I'm kind of pessimistic, and particularly right now, in that the examiners can build a pretty good file against your mark.
Right.
It's not like a huge evidentiary lift. They just go and find stuff online and add it into the file. And then, while they're supposed to have the burden, their burden to meet is pretty low, actually. So,
right.
And the appeal board is made up, a lot of them are former examiners. And so a lot of them know what they're looking for and how to look at that type of evidentiary record. So it's becoming tougher and tougher to get these marks through these days.
Can I ask a question? When you are searching the trademark database, is there a way to designate that, close in this context is a surname and not, the everyday use of the word? Is there a way that you do that? Or when you're searching, is it going to pull up, trademarks that just use the term as we would use it in ordinary conversation?
It's a good question. There's no real way to flag it as a surname. Okay. What I would be looking for, probably, if I'm trying to make that distinction, is what they call a 2F declaration, which we should certainly talk about because like even widely popular names are going to be able to be registered to some degree if they can acquire distinctiveness.
Okay.
And so Section 2F of the Lanham Act allows you to provide an affidavit or some sort of proof with an accompanying affidavit that shows, hey, I've actually acquired distinctiveness in this mark. So if you think about like Ford, McDonald's, Disney, all those were surnames. Let's say they get a rejection early on. Well, they can show maybe in a few different ways. I've been using it for over 5 years with substantially by myself in this marketplace. I should be entitled because I've acquired distinctiveness. People can tell the difference between, this as my surname and it as a mark applying, it's conveying more information than just my surname to these people. They're approaching this as a brand.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and move there because even if you have a last name, if that name has acquired distinctiveness as of like the origin of source, then it's no longer merely a surname. And that's what I'm looking for in that database. If we're searching to answer your question, I'm going to look for, okay, is there a 2F declaration there? Because if so, they had some sort of rejection based on descriptiveness. And in some instances, it might be surname type of descriptiveness.
Okay.
Because 2F, you can overcome other types of problems with a 2F declaration other than just surnames. It could be if the mark is merely descriptive, for example, or geographically descriptive. You can say, well, that might be true, but I have all of this evidence of I've sold 500,000 units all across the United States, or I have 500,000 followers. I've built this huge thing. There's no magic number in a lot of these instances. It's, can I make an evidentiary showing that convinces the examiner that I've got enough credibility here that people view it as more than just a surname? That's the aspect of it that's the consumer protection piece. Because if I say, well, you can't actually protect that, then I'm saying I'm going to allow anybody else to come in and use this mark. And all of a sudden you've got potential confusion when one person has built a true brand out of their name. So those are those competing interests that we were talking about earlier. So
sure.
It doesn't take like huge levels of fame to get there. What we're trying to balance is this right to the surname, the concept that it's all about consumer confusion. So a real life case, let's take a guy named Pat Bro. He's the founder and CEO of the Bro Group. And I should tell people that this is BROE, which is still exciting to get to say bro over and over again.
Very exciting.
So they provide financial management services, which makes it even better if you're talking to your buddies and they ask you where you keep your money and you say, I'll keep it with my bro. So they apply and we have to go through the factors because then, the examiner looks and says, oh, this is a surname. I searched it up and I found people with this name. But, let's go through the evidence. Rusty, do you know any other bros, BROE, out there?
I wish I did. It sounds like a pretty cool group to be associated with. I don't know if you watch the morning show on one of the streaming networks.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
One of the characters on this last season, his first name was Bro. And I'd have to go back and look, but my recollection is it was not just spelled BRO.
Right.
So maybe it's a first name that we could also see it used
interesting. As. Okay. Yeah, it might be. On this one, there were enough bros where the PTO put in evidence of over 1,000 people with that surname.
Wow.
Which doesn't sound like a lot, but for these purposes, it's enough where you've got to consider, how many of these other bros are going to get into financial management. It's a bro heavy,
all of them,
a bro heavy business,
Yeah. It's what you're going into. It's your first choice.
Absolutely. You were gifted a name and you better use it.
Right.
So evidence was applicant is also, quote, a family-owned business. And there was kind of what they call negative dictionary evidence to show that bro is not a defined term that means something else, which is oftentimes what we're trying to create just arguments, just trying to get this thing through and showing, this translates to some ancient language to the color red, so we might do a logo in red or something like that. You try to get those through. Those aren't convincing anymore, but at a point in time they would fly. So the board looks at it and says, okay, it's a relatively rare surname, but it's still primarily a surname. There's no other thing that it could be. So the But here we have this example where I was saying that, even if that is the case, you can still make a showing, as the applicant did here, by putting in evidence that he's been using this with substantial exclusivity in his industry for over 40 years. And so the board comes in and they say, oh, wow, that's a long time. We have, quote, a long-standing practice of allowing registration of surnames under Section 2F. That's the section I was talking about, that you issue this declaration and say, I've been doing this for a long time, or I've got widespread evidence of my use, those sorts of things, upon a showing of substantially exclusive and continuous use for 5 years. And we're going to do that here, is what they say. So the refusal to register is reversed and Bro gets registered. And as of a couple of days ago when I was putting this together, is still registered. So shout out to Pat Bro out there.
Yeah, good job, Pat. This is one of those things where I'm thinking, okay, you've used it for 40 years. This is off the track, but what's motivating you to try to register it after all that time? And all I'm thinking is Pat is ready to retire and wants to sell, pass along the business. And as an asset to include in the deal, he needs the Bro Group to be a trademark term.
It does start to sound like that when you start adding up those years. That's about, particularly in financial management, that's a long time to go.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. That was my thought as well, is that, okay, well, probably somebody did some due diligence on this and said, well, what if Pat's no longer with the business? What gives us the right to continue to use this name? All those sorts of things. Maybe I'm wrong, but all these types of things we're reading between the tea leaves based on actually pretty, common experience of these things happening. So yeah, for sure.
I love it.
Well, the question then is, I told you that this had to do with guitars, and what does this have to do with guitars? And I was hoping it would have to do more with guitars. I should tell you that I saw a case come down about Bowens, the name Bowens, from the Trademark Office's appeal board. And I thought it was about George Bowen, who passed away a couple of years ago. I don't want to make too much out of it, but we talk about musicians making or tinkering with things a lot. George Bowen was a real player, like a studio musician, played live too. And I've never been able to play one, but he handmade like acoustic guitars. Okay. And they are stunning to look at, and they sound really good.
Okay.
I think his son runs the company now and makes guitars as well. So I was reading through these cases that were coming down, and this one jumped out at me, and I put it in the stack of like, okay, this is a podcast case right here. And I was so pumped to get into it and was hoping that the board would get to have this discussion about surnames, guitars, and how they're fairly important because of the reputation of builders and things like that.
Sure.
And so I first thought that it was weird that they applied for Bowens with an S, because I was almost positive that the last name was Bowen without an S.
That was your first clue.
Yeah, then I'm reading it, and it came to me, I don't think this is the same guitar company at all. It's not adding up. And Rusty, do you have one of those feeling charts at home for your children to point to which feelings they're feeling?
So we generally just express the feelings with yelling as opposed to a chart. Yeah. A chart might be a good idea, but I have seen them like at the doctor's office, that kind of thing. Where I think it's more, how much pain are you in? But yeah. I think it's the same sort of thing.
It is. It's this theory that if you can at least first identify your feelings, you're halfway to the goal of being able to kind of make something more useful out of them than just screaming, social, emotional wellness, etc. And so, of course, we have a chart that has all these weird faces on it for our kids to point to. They don't do it anymore, but we used to say, okay, which one is it that you're feeling? You have to decide right here and right now which one you're feeling.
You get one shot at this.
Yeah, exactly. So if I'm reading this case and I'm realizing this is not the company I thought it was and would not get to talk about it, I'm pointing to my feelings on this feeling chart, and I'm pointing to the saddest Austin available. Yeah. So, but let's get into what's going on, because it's still a useful case. So probably a little background. When you apply for a trademark at the trademark office, you tell the trademark office like 4 basic things. You tell them what the mark is that you're applying for, who is going to own it, what you're applying it in connection with, so your goods and services, and then how long have you been using it?
Yep.
And you don't necessarily have to be using it at the time of the application. You can file what's called an intent to use application, but before you register it, you got to show use of it. That's a US type of thing. And there's a couple of exceptions that I know some people are listening and already jumping to. Not important for this conversation.
Yeah, stay out of our mentions.
Yeah. So they apply for the mark Bowens, Bowens. And it's not just for guitars. This is another clue to me when I started reading the goods and services. It is for like tons of stuff. Amps, MP3 players, speaker cables. There's one for, quote, tremolo intonation tools comprised of a screw and correspondingly groovy hollow cylinder for adjusting guitar intonation.
Okay.
There's another one for, quote, audio equipment, namely computer peripheral device for controlling DJ audio software. So I'm already thinking these aren't my guys over here. This isn't Bowen Guitars, that, beloved luthier maker of these fine instruments. So still don't know who these people are or what they do, but here's the case anyway. The thing that really clued me in was that they filed it as an intent to use application, meaning that they're going to show use later, like I said a moment ago. So when you do that, you take that 2F declaration off the board. You can't tell them that you've acquired distinctiveness because that has to be based on prior use. And until you show use, you can't have prior use. So you could arrange for it, but you'd have to kind of change the basis of your filing. And they didn't do that here. It's an intent to use filing. So for all our purposes, we're just saying they haven't used these things yet, but we're still going through the examination process. So they get a refusal based on this idea that it's primarily merely a surname doctrine. And they argue back and forth with the examiner, and the examiner holds tight and says, if you don't like it, you got to appeal. So they appeal. And the board finds that the surname Bowens is not rare. The examiner put 23,000 into evidence from a database. Though I would mention that the census data, the government's own data around names, says it's around 9,000. Still a healthy number around the close level of organization that your family runs. So here's the big one. Nobody at the applicant is named Bowens, Bowen, or any variation. The board found this to be a so-called neutral factor. To me, it's like a light switch. It's either off or on. It might not be the deciding factor, but I don't know why we have this factor at all if we're just going to say it's a neutral factor. I don't know how it becomes any more favorable to the applicant.
So they wanted to register it as Bowens, but nobody there was named Bowens.
Correct.
It's almost like they picked Xerox or Exxon or any other word, and they were going to give some meaning to that word, right?
Yeah, and I should mention, this happens. Like, we have clients who come in, they pick a mark, and, fortunately, you search it, and if one of the items that I often include in my searches is this a surname? I'll run to that census data and just run across it just to make sure, because they're becoming more and more prevalent. Where it used to, when I started practice, you didn't necessarily have to worry about that. But we certainly have had clients who had no idea it was a surname, and it gets picked up on the surname list, and they get a refusal based on it.
And they're going, wait, this isn't a surname. This has nothing to do with a name.
Right. We'd never intended this. So it's a little weird that the board says it's a neutral factor when it's like, well, let's give one to the applicant here because it's not their name. So like I said, it doesn't rule the day. It's a multi-factor test. So and Rusty, this, whenever they do a multi-factor test, they say no factors determinative. We're just going to weigh it all. We're throwing these out here because we got to do something, but we're going to weigh it all at the end and then make a decision in the totality. So the applicant's counsel argues there are other meanings like Bowen's Island or Bowen's disease. The problem with that is the examiner came back with evidence that those things are named after people. So it's it's just a surname. So good try, man. Like, I would have done it too. What else? You got to throw it out there to answer to call the question.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any other usage that is not a name for Bowen, right? I mean, it doesn't have a meaning. It doesn't have a meaning at all, I don't think.
Yeah.
Although I guess neither does Xerox or, some of those other words, but I guess those weren't also surnames in some instances.
Right. Yeah. So that potentially, if it means something else, if it's just a coined term and you came up with it, but it happens to be a surname, like, it's a dicey one now. These are just, like I said, they're more and more common. If you're on that list of surnames, you're probably going to get a refusal. I think there's probably some automatic or automated system that's flagging these things as they come in for the examiners.
Right.
Just say, hey, heads up, you might want to check the surname list on this one. But, that's the rub of it. So the end of this case is Bowen's is not registered.
Okay.
Because it's found to be primarily merely a surname.
We don't have any insight into why they chose that name to begin with.
We do not. I'm still not over the insight that this is not Bowen Guitars. So, an ongoing company. I think there's another potential problem out there for our applicant friends, but what do I know? So,
yeah, it's similar enough that it could cause confusion. It has caused confusion for you, although you may be a small audience that would be confused by it.
Yeah, certainly not marketplace confusion, but just in the reading of it, they confused me into getting excited to come talk about this case and tell you about this great luthier that, some great players that play these guitars. I don't know how many of them there are. I mean, they're fairly expensive, like right out of the gate.
Yeah, I was going to say, are there any well-known musicians who are associated with that brand that you know of?
Not well-known, but there's some kind of players that are out there.
Yeah.
And so, they have a really scripted B at the top of the headstock, and kind of going back to our headstock discussion.
Right.
And this might be different from guitar to guitar, but it's kind of off kilter from the ones that I've seen. It's not symmetrical. So it has this kind of, and the B has a little flow to it. It's a beautiful piece.
Okay.
And there's a lot of kind of pearl inlay work that's done on a lot of these. Just really lovely to look at guitars. And then you never know, they use kind of different woods than you see on a lot of other guitars. And so if you believe in what are called tone woods and that theory of, guitar making, you'll start to hear the different sounds.
Okay.
So, one thing that they would tell you is it doesn't accentuate the lows and the highs like a lot of other types of guitars do. They're designed to be even throughout. So it's a very versatile acoustic instrument across different playing types and things like that. So, yeah, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on tone woods, etc. But that's if you ever go to a presentation on those things, you'll come out a believer, man. They will make a believer out of you that oh man, Koa is the bomb. That's what I gotta get because that's what's ringing out to my ears. It's like going to the mattress store and they start you out on the most expensive mattress.
Sure.
And then everything else after that is just doesn't compare. So
we're going to have to figure out how to work tone woods into a episode.
Yeah, I'll work on that. Maybe we can find some. There are people who will tell you it does not make a, really important difference.
They're just not believers, man.
Yeah, they just haven't been exposed, man. You got to really dig in there and hear a bunch of different guitars right next to one another. You will start to hear differences. The problem is that you'll go to a sales presentation by one of the big guitar makers and they'll start telling you, oh yeah, okay, this is what you got to listen for. And so you're primed for it. And so that's what makes it tough to kind of am I actually hearing this or is this, but then they'll play the other one next to it that you just heard. And then you hear that one again. It's oh man, I'm really starting to believe this thing that the ancient forests are singing through these instruments basically and picking the frequencies that are, most favored to exude from this instrument.
It reminds me of bourbon tasting notes, where it's oh, I do taste currant in there. It's right. If it's written down for you, you're sort of going to taste those things, right? Your brain is kind of tricked into it.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Marshmallow. It's all sorts of weird stuff. Yeah.
Ooh, campfire. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's the basic gist of surnames. It's an interesting doctrine. And, we got to work through some trademark cases here, but it's really about kind of, what do we do with these tensions between a person's name and their reputation, and then also trying to provide, the protections for consumer confusion. It's an interesting policy item. It's I won't say a hot topic, but it's kind of a more prevalent basis of refusal that you're seeing these days at the trademark office if you ever apply for marks. So
yeah, interesting. Well, I'll have to let Stacy know as she's trying to get her business off the ground.
Yes, please do. I'm happy to take on her case, pro bono, do the old family discount. So, I think that serves it up. You got anything else to add?
No, that's an interesting topic. That was a good one.
Well, folks, thanks for bearing with us on that. I'm sorry we talked about guitars again. We'll try to give you some non-guitar episodes here in the near future, but thanks for hanging with us. While you're at it, make sure you're subscribed, hit those 5 stars, and, Whether you like the guitars or not, there's certainly no infringement intended.
Copyright Troutman Pepperlock, LLP. These recorded materials are designed for educational purposes only. This podcast is not legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual participants. Troutman does not make any representations or warranties, expressed or implied, regarding the contents of this podcast. Information on previous case results does not guarantee a similar future result. Users of this podcast may save and use the podcast only for personal or other non-commercial educational purposes. No other use, including without limitation, reproduction, retransmission, or editing of this podcast may be made without the prior written permission of Troutman Pepperlock. If you have any questions, please contact us at troutman.com.